some gifts. We come bearing gifts.
Okay. So as soon as we found out that we had all got accepted and we were going to be able to meet these 3 astronauts, we were all wondering, ooh, we get to get autographs and photos, and then we as student ambassadors got to thinking, and we thought about, can we give something back to them? And so one of these is for Mr. Gordon as well. So if you would please come up to the stage. No. So what these are is a 3D printed lamps. You tap them to light them up, and the 3D printing design was kind of an inspiration of, or an example of something that our generation has produced, and the moon was supposed to represent something that they have accomplished at their generation. So, and this is our little way of saying thank you.
Here you go. I got one for you. You 3 share. You 3 share.
Okay. So our first question is, can you give us a brief description of what your missions were and what your goals were, and if you got them all done?
Who do you want to answer?
All 3 of you, please.
What was our goals? Well, our goal was to test the spacecraft and make it, approve it as good enough so that we can send Apollo 8 out to the moon. What people may not realize around here is Apollo 8 had been training to go around the moon for about 6 weeks, and yet they weren't going to get approval until we'd shown that we had recovered from the Apollo 1 accident where the spacecraft had burned and the crew had died. So that was the first principal objective. We had spent 21 months after the Apollo 1 fire getting some changes in. There was a lot of those changes we'd tried to get in before, but they didn't have the time to accomplish those. And when we got all those done, we expected it to be a good spacecraft. Turns out it was a good spacecraft, and so 2 weeks after we got back, they approved Apollo 8 to go around the moon. That's one of the first thoughts I can think about it. Other than that, it was just a nice, exciting, very satisfying mission. And today, it's, I think I mentioned earlier, it's the longest, most ambitious, most successful first test flight of any new flying machine.
My mission was the 5th landing on the moon, Apollo 16. John Young was my commander. I was a lunar module pilot. We were going to land on the moon, and Ken Mattingly was the command module pilot. Our mission was targeted into the Descartes Highlands, which was the first and only mission to the mountains of the moon. And we had a lot of exciting experiments to do. We were the second flight with the lunar rover, which really revolutionized lunar exploration. Prior to Apollo 15, everybody walked, and you can't walk very far up there. And so with the car, it was really, really exciting. And it was very successful. We had a few problems, but thanks to mission control, the unsung heroes of Apollo. On every Apollo mission, there was something went wrong, and if it hadn't been for mission control, things would have been a lot different in Apollo. So I give those guys and gals in Mission Control the credit for the success of Apollo. So we got back. The problems we had were a major problem in the command module engine. So we had to come home a day early. And so instead of 12 days, we ended up 11 days. But it was very successful as far as the lunar exploration goes and all the rocks we collected. And so I was very proud to have been and humbled to have been involved in that mission.
Okay, I was the command module pilot on Apollo 15 just before Charlie's flight. We were the first of a new series of spacecraft. There was an upgraded booster. We carried a lot more weight. We had more thrust than it had before because we carried the first lunar rover, which Charlie had the opportunity to drive on Apollo 16. We also carried a scientific instrument module in the service module in back of the command module that contained a number of remote sensing devices, plus a mass spectrometer, which I'm going to tell you about in a minute. Plus we had two large cameras. One was a high-resolution camera that would take a very good picture of an object down to about 4 feet from 60 miles away. And the other was a mapping camera that I used, and we photographed about 25% of the moon's surface. We were there, I think we set the record also for being there the longest time at the time. I think you guys probably exceeded it. We set the longest stay time record on the lunar surface at the time. I think Dave and Jim were out of the spacecraft about 18 hours over the 3 days. I was in orbit by myself for the 3 days that they were on the surface. I guess the one other thing that distinguished our flight was that I did a spacewalk on the way home, and that was to recover the film canisters that were associated with the two cameras I had back there in the service module. I'm going to just go way off track here for just a minute because I still think it's kind of funny. I've been asked the question 1,000 times, how do you go to the toilet in space? I'm not going to answer that question except for one little comment, and that is when we had to pee, we peed in a tube, and we collected that in a plastic bag, and it was and it just kind of grew, you know, as the time went on. Of course, the plastic bag got fuller and fuller and fuller, and there were times during the flight when we'd open a valve to the outside, and the vacuum would suck all that stuff out, and we'd get rid of it. What was interesting about that was that urine becomes snow when exposed to a vacuum. So when you pull all the urine out of the bag, it forms a cloud of snow that goes alongside you. And unfortunately, it's going the same direction, the same speed, the same time you are. So it's kind of hard to get rid of that little cloud of snow out there that turns out to be yours to begin with. I'm leading up to the mass spectrometer. I had a mass spectrometer in my science compartment back there, and it was on an extendable arm or pole, and I could push it out about 30 feet, and it would look at whatever was in the lunar atmosphere in front of the box that was the mass spectrometer. So in other words, I could drag that through the orbit around the moon, and we'd look to see if there was anything in the lunar atmosphere, right? Well, you know, we didn't think there's anything there because there is no atmosphere around the moon. But about a day after we got there, Dave and Jim were down on the surface, and I had it out, and I get a call from Houston. They said, hey, we're picking up something on the mass spectrometer. And I thought, oh, gee, I wonder what that is. That's kind of interesting here in the lunar atmosphere. We didn't think there was anything here. What is it? Well, we're not quite sure yet, but we'll let you know. And a couple hours later, they called back and they said, okay, we got it all figured out. I said, what is it? They said, your urine. You're recording your own urine in lunar orbit, because what happens in lunar orbit when you're angled to the equator and the moon's rotating a little bit, your trajectory changes just a little bit each time. And so that 30-foot beam going out there just kind of hit just right to the cloud of urine that was sitting out there in the lunar atmosphere. Anyway, I thought you'd be really interested in that.
You obviously didn't read the one-page memo I wrote after Apollo 7 about how we did all those things.
So I've got another question. What are some of the pre-NASA credentials that you had to acquire to become an astronaut?
Those who got selected in the astronaut program came from many, many different walks of life and different backgrounds. I think all of us basically started out as pilots. I think Walt was probably an academic before he became a pilot. Charlie and I both went to one of the military academies, learned how to fly, then went back to school. So pre-qualification for this program, when we were selected, was you had to be less than 35 years old, you had to have a bachelor's degree in science or engineering, you had to have 1,000 hours of flying time, you had to pass a physical. There were 800 and some odd in our application cycle, and of course the ones that got picked were not quite the minimum. It's somewhere in the middle. So I would say the average was we were all, well, most of us were test pilots by then with 3,000 or 4,000 hours of flying time. Most of us had multiple master's degrees. We were all less than 35. We all passed the physical. There was one selection group before ours. In fact, Walt would be more familiar with that than I. They selected a group of scientists who were not pilots, but we realized that we're going to need scientific observations in space, particularly in a space shuttle in the International Space Station. So there were several groups of scientists that were selected. They didn't have to be pilots. So it depends on what's required. I think when we had a program that went to the moon, we needed pilots with a scientific background. As we got into the shuttle program and into the space station program, we needed a couple of pilots to get them there, but the whole emphasis was on the science once we got there.
Well, actually, I was not a scientist. It turns out that I didn't even go to college. I started college when I was 25 or 26. And out of high school, I became a Marine Corps fighter pilot. And of course, I thought I was the best Marine Corps fighter pilot ever up until that time. I wasn't able to convince you. After a while, when I was in Korea on duty, I won't go into the incident that came up, but I began to realize that I better go to college. And so I transferred to reserve squadrons and was working on a PhD in physics when I got there. I was flying that. But when we got back, when they finally started selecting, and it was about the same, about 800 I think we started with on that particular round too. And there was about 3 of us that had been basically up to working on a doctorate in something, but the only one guy had gotten a doctorate. And so that was probably the beginning when they started getting the ideas of getting scientists. I have to say that now the world has changed completely on that. The program is open up to anybody, any race, any education to take a look at. Still, well, they don't even have the same youth requirement. Back when I was applying, we all had to be in there, I think 33 when in our selection. And so now, I'm not sure how many of our 30 people, when I was down there, by the time I was selected, we had 30 astronauts. And I'm not sure how many of us 30 they would allow to go fly today at the space station, because there's a lot of scientific equipment they take up there, and you ride along on a Russian spacecraft, you don't do anything. Actually, the Russians don't do much either when they're doing that, because they're in an automated vehicle, and unless something goes wrong, they're along for the ride. So things have changed considerably, and I doubt if we'll ever get back to the way it was when we were there.
I don't have much to add except that it was, of course, when we applied, it was all male. Now it was opened up with the first shuttle group was female came in. And I was always impressed that I even got selected. I had the minimum requirements, but I got selected. And now I look back last summer of 2017, I think it was, NASA said, we need more astronauts. And they had 18,000 applications. And they picked 12. Now, I don't know how you go from 18,000 to 12, but NASA did. And I would have been cut out at about the 15,000th, I think. But I'm just very, very thankful that I was selected to be mentored by guys like Tom Stafford and then to get a flight to the moon, and was very, very fortunate.
Let me just make a comment about some talk that's going around today about women in the space program. I think there's a book that's now been written about Wally Funk, and she was part of what was called the Apollo, or the Mercury 13. There were a group of women pilots that were given astronaut physicals at the Lovelace Clinic in Albuquerque. And I think Dr. Lovelace is the one who got all that going. It was never an official program, but there's been a lot of talk through the years about why weren't one of those women picked to fly in space. And the answer is that they weren't qualified. I don't care whether you're man, woman, green, purple, blue, whatever you are, you gotta be qualified to fly in space. You gotta have the right credentials to do that. And those original women, I don't believe, ever had the right credentials. Later on, when we got into the shuttle program, there are quite a few women now in the program, and they're absolutely perfect as shuttle commanders or whatever. Eileen Collins was the first one that flew, and she'd fly three shuttle flights, I think, as a commander. Absolutely superb. So any talk about NASA not selecting certain groups of people into the space program because they're racist or because they're chauvinist or because they're this or that, the other thing, there's always a reason why they pick the people they pick to fly into space. Even different ethnicities. I think when people are qualified, it doesn't make any difference whether you're black or white. I don't think it makes a bit of difference. You're going to get selected if you got the qualifications.
I will just add a thought to that too, because every time that I end up reading about that group of ladies that they gave the physical to back in the beginning, not one of them, there was one that flew a little bit of private jet time, not one of them was even close to what the minimum requirements were back in those days. Now the ladies that have been since, you mentioned Eileen Collins, very good. I'm sure that they cover a range of it, but some of them I think are very competitive today.
Okay, so your next question is, how are you supported by family and friends during and before your missions?
Supported by family?
Family and friends.
Family and friends.
Tough question. I guess to be truthful, I wasn't. My wife divorced me before I could fly. She's a very nice girl, but she was not very good in publicity, in the public eye. And she objected strongly to reporters snooping around our house all the time. And it got to a point where she couldn't handle it anymore. We were still friends. We've been friends since we were married back in 1955. We've always been friends, but we did get divorced before my flight. That was a kind of an interesting thing because there was this thing about all astronauts are all-American Boy Scouts, and they never did anything wrong, and they wouldn't fool around at all, ever. No, yeah, right, no. we don't want to get into that. But anyway, I was told by Deke Slayton, the boss, that if my divorce was an honest divorce and there was no scandal and he wasn't going to read about it in National Enquirer or something like that, then I was fine on the flight. Everybody else that I knew in the program who was close to that point, and I must say that there were quite a few divorces in the program. Quite a few of the guys, after they made a flight, they got divorced. I think I'm the only one who let my wife divorce me before the flight because I felt that was more important than anything else that I could do at the time. What's crazy is that since then, she and I were, for years, we've been good friends. So there was nothing bad about our relationship. But I flew as a bachelor, which made certain things available to me that I would not have had available if I'd been married.
Actually, almost everybody from the first 30, when we had 30 of us there were everybody, but I think 2 guys were single when they got in there. Everybody else was married. And over the next several years, there was a number of divorces that were sitting back off stage here, but everybody was scared to get a divorce because they didn't want to be ruled out. And finally, I think the first divorce of an active astronaut was Don Isley. Well, I think it was, after we got back from our mission. And it was amazing, after Don got a divorce, all hell broke loose. I mean, there was a lot of divorces because they started getting the nerve to do that. So I'd say we probably had pretty much the normal kind of statistics about it, but everybody was scared to death for the first 5 or 6 years.
Well, my wife, Dottie, who's here, we made it. We've been in the bar ditch a lot in our relationship, but we've celebrated 55 years together. And I gotta say, she was a real rock in our relationship. Back in those days, we lived in Houston, which was the home of the Astronaut. And they're still working on I-35 60 years later in Houston, but we loved it. And Dottie kept the home fires burning while we were training in Florida. Most of the training in Apollo was in Florida in the simulators and other places, so we were gone a lot. And we had 2 young sons. They supported me, and it was just a rocky road, but we came through, thank the Lord. And so it was a situation where the people I flew with, John Young had a divorce, and T.K. Mattingly was just recently married, and his wife was expecting during our flight. I think overall there was a lot of support. The gals that were there had a big deal because we were gone all the time. Being an astronaut back in those days, and even today, is not an easy job. It's a lot of hard work. You were out training all over the United States, down at Kennedy, and so you leave on Sunday night, Monday morning, come back the rest, at least in Apollo, you come back Friday night or Saturday morning. So we were gone a lot, and but it was a situation where we stuck it out, and so I thank God for my precious wife, Dottie.
Okay, sorry, my voice. So, The next question is, would you say that today's children and teenagers have influenced the space exploration programs? And if so, how?
Teachers and children today, if they're influenced?
Yes.
Well, I have to tell you, I'm not near as much in touch with teachers today as I used to be. 60, 70, 80 years ago. I knew that I had personal exposure. Now, I have some teachers that are friends, and I can't tell you that I'm going to have a real strong feeling about how they do, but the whole business of education, that too has been in a change in my lifetime. And back in the days in the 50s, 40s, the 60s, the teachers, they were always focused on getting the best you could. They didn't have to try to make sure that everybody came out the same. So they encouraged people to stick their necks out a little bit and try to get ahead. Education could be, I think, very important. And what bothers me today is how we have gotten to the point where instead of pushing equal opportunity, they're pushing equal outcome a lot. And I don't think that makes good sense as a society at all. In the old days, I would give a lot of plus to my education as keeping the right mental attitude on it.
We were discussing tonight at our table about science books, and Apollo gets one paragraph. And I think that's a shame. It's one of the greatest, I don't understand why it only gets one paragraph. I don't think any of us are looking for more exposure, but one of the greatest achievements of humankind was the success of Apollo and the 400,000 people that were involved in getting us there. And it was a great American achievement. And we need to tell everybody that.
I personally believe that 500 years from now, there's only going to be one thing they remember about the 20th century, and that is that landed on the moon.
If I understand the question right, things were a lot different when we were little. I got my early education in a one-room country school. There were 2 of us in my class. There were 32, I think, in the school total up through the end of the 6th grade. And I think I learned more in that one-room country school than I would have if I'd been in a class of all kids my age. Because when I was in the 2nd and 3rd grade, I'm sitting there listening to the 5th and 6th graders doing their lessons, and I was learning an awful lot that I would never learn any other way. One of the things I learned was how to add and subtract and multiply and divide, either in my head or on a piece of paper without a computer. I'm a little concerned today that we're relying so much on computers to do our work for us that we're adding and subtracting and multiplying and dividing on a computer, and we're reading the answer off the computer, and we don't have to think about what those numbers mean. That's a little bit of a concern for me. I think it's always important to know the underlying philosophy or theory behind something like math that you're gonna pursue in your life. And I think it's awfully important that we kind of get back to a basic thing like what does 2 and 2 mean? And I think that's going to be very important to us sometime in the future.
Okay, so what do you say to all the critics who state that space exploration is not worth the cost of American lives?
Oh boy, you opened up the door. That space exploration is not worth the cost. Is that the way to say it?
Of American lives.
The what?
Of American lives.
So,
The people that were killed.
Yes.
It's not worth the price we pay.
Oh, not worth the price we pay in terms of human cost? You don't get anywhere unless you take risks. And when you take risks, you run into the possibility that things are going to happen that you don't want to happen. Space program is no different. Aviation is no different. We had a fire at the Cape in 1967, January 67, that took the lives of 3 guys sitting inside the spacecraft. That same week, at Edwards, California, at the Flight Test Center, 3 pilots were killed testing new airplanes, and nobody ever heard about them. So a lot of this is a function of the media and how they see it and how they want to report it. But you're not going to advance the way we'd like to advance unless you take the risks. And when you take risks, you're gonna risk lives, and it's well worth it, because the end result of all of this is that we're gonna figure out a place to go when we can't live here anymore, and we got to do that.
I don't believe you're going to get any place in life unless you're willing to pay the price. And in those days, it was standard and common. We knew there was some risk involved, but we always thought we could handle it. Right or left, that's what we thought, we could handle it. And frankly, I enjoyed things more when there was an opportunity to stick your neck out a little, to try to get ahead. I totally disagree with what's going on today, where nobody is supposed to have a risk. They even try to make space so safe that it's not the same program as it used to be, and nothing I can do about it. I happen to believe it's going to continue to change. I'm glad I lived when I did.
If you remember back in the days of Apollo, not only did we have 3 killed in the fire at Kennedy in Apollo 1, but we had 4 guys killed in airplane accidents, 1 killed in an automobile accident. But the focus, it was really a sad time to lose your friends, but we'd all experienced that in fighter squadrons and test pilots. And the focus was press on, keep your focus on the mission, and we're going to come through this, and we'll honor those that have given their lives for this mission. As Kennedy said, we're going to go to the moon, and we're going to return safely. We're going to go to the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. We're going to do this and the other things. And that leadership and that focus NASA kept. And so we mourned the loss of our friends, but the focus was press on into the unknown, and we're going to do this. And we did it in 8 years and 2 months.
All right, that was the last question. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Gorton.
So yeah, if you want to sit down, guys, that's great. The student ambassador said, we got it. I think they got it, right? That was awesome. So yeah, you're done. So I want to give a little recap of Back to Space, and then we'll do one last great thing and wrap up. So we started this thing a year ago. What is it? Back to Space. I talk about the Cardassians a lot, and Pepper earlier kind of figured it out. So I don't talk about the Cardassians to pick on the Cardassians. I think it's really interesting. You can go in any high school class, and everybody knows the names of the Cardassians, and nobody knows these guys. So the real question should be, what are they doing right? Because they ain't nearly as interesting as these guys are, and they haven't done anything even that scratches the surface of what these men, these 3 that sat up here, and the other 3 that are in the papers, yeah. So the thing that we need to do, every single person here, is we have got to drive the inspiration. We have got to take, what are the Cardassians doing? It's called pop culture. You know, it's not that hard. And these kids were selected because they understand pop culture. And they blow the doors off the freshman class, engineering class at MIT. So we're bringing these things together. That's what this is all about. And as I said in the beginning, we wanted you to have fun tonight. We need your help. In just a second, we were going to get an auctioneer to do this, and it just fell through at the last minute. And so I'm talking to one of our sponsors at the beginning, and they said, well, Sam will do it. And I go, well, who's Sam? Sam, come up here. So Sam is not an auctioneer. He's never auctioned anything in his entire life. This charcoal, Sam, are you ready for the big time? Of course. Okay. Sam is ready for the big time. So we want to auction this thing. This helps keep this program going. And, we think it just takes the air out of the room. And then also, when you go out the door, the Boy Scouts have some really cool things. We have flight kits that we call the Group 1 flight kits that have amazing things, like the Group 1 patch, which looks a lot like Walt Cunningham's Apollo 7 patch. And we have a commemorative coin, and pens, and stickers, and a great bag. And so please buy one on the way out. And we'll wrap in just a second. But Sam, let's see how good you are.
All right, hello everyone. Well, first, I'm up here on behalf of our corporate sponsors. We have Carrington, of course, and Microsoft, and all the other big ones in the room. Now that I've called you out, we're going to do the auction, all right? So I got a chance to sit down in the back over a beer and talk with the charcoal artist, Maciek. And he's pretty humble, as you saw as he came up here. He was talking, and he was quite quiet when he was talking to me. We discussed at length some things, but as soon as he stepped away, one of his good friends came up to me and he goes, "You don't understand, he's done charcoals for Richard Nixon, the Pope, Enzo Ferrari, and Chuck Norris." And I don't know, he had me at Chuck Norris. Yeah, and I was like, that's impressive. This charcoal is immaculate. He was telling me the story of how he creates these. With oil and paint and other specific mediums, if you make a mistake, you can adjust. You can change the tone, you can cover it up. Not with charcoal. On charcoal, if you miss a stroke, if you mess up, it's in there forever. It's now a part of the work. And if you don't like it, you have to scrap the entire project and start again. Maciek made this stroke, every single brush stroke, every single movement on this piece is exactly how he wanted it, and I think it came out immaculately. With that being said, we talked about the high names. These prints start anywhere from $15,000, and they've been gone for up to $80,000, as we mentioned before. We're going to start the bidding at $3,000, and we do have a secret minimum to meet, but we're going to open it up now at $3,000. So, without further ado, do I hear 3,000? We have 3,000 right here. Do we hear 3,500? 3,500? Do we see 4? Do I see 4? 4 right here in the back. Do we see 4,500? 4,500 for the once in a lifetime one-off print. 45. 4,500. 4,500 in the front. 5. Do I see 5,000 for the print? 5,000. So 5 right in the back. Do we see 55? Once again, guys, this is not you buying the charcoal art. This is you investing in the future to carry on the name of the Apollo program long into the future. This is the only one of its kind, and it is a massive, massive honor to even be able to purchase something like this. So we have 5. Do I see 55? 10,000 at the front. Ladies and gentlemen. Do we hear 10,500? 10,500? Anyone? 10,500? I think we can beat that. Anyone? It is. It's signed. Thank you. It is signed by all 3 astronauts. They went out, they got to see it early, and it's signed by all three. And like I said, it is a piece of history to commemorate the 50th anniversary. It's an original charcoal, and other prints like this have been done for Richard Nixon, Enzo Ferrari, the Pope, things like that. So with all that being said, do we hear 10-5? 10-5 for the print? I'm going to call it there. 10-5 going once. Keep going. 10-5. Oh, 10,000, I'm sorry. Do we hear 10-5 from anyone else? If not, that's 10,000 going once, 10,000 going twice. We're going to say sold for 10,000 to the gentleman down front. Congratulations.
Well, the gentleman down front is somebody I've known a very, very long time, so Chris McFarland, thank you. We appreciate your support. Chris, some of you probably know, Chris was one of our first investors and an amazing friend, and thank you, seriously. Hey, Eric, Eric, can you come up for just a second? So this thing would not have been possible without Eric Lennington and Terry, and all of the sponsors, as Sam was saying. I appreciate it, but wow. It's all over, and we pulled it off, I think, right? So here you go. Take the stand. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So one thing I want to do very quickly is I want to shout out to our sponsors. Should have a little video here. Azure Jeep. Microsoft. New Minds. Happy Spectrum. Terra Astro. And Red. Water Environment. And as we've said many times, you know, we are a startup, and really, I think we can all be very proud, not just of this event that we pulled off here. I hope you all had a wonderful time tonight. You cannot imagine the number of details that it takes to do something like this. And I have to call out, it's funny because I can't see a thing here with all the lights, but I have to call out and recognize my wife, Val, who was extremely helpful in asking me questions like, should we have rain ponchos on the bus? And I'm like, rain ponchos? Who thinks about stuff like that? But she does. So I'm very, very happy to have her help on this. Is Dave here? Yeah, Dave's over there. Dave, of course, is our CFO. His best talent is not spending money, which is what you want in a CFO. And I want to also thank him for bringing the Boy Scouts in, checking you all in tonight. They were helpful in setting up the room and the table place cards, and I think that worked out pretty well overall. So with that, I wish you a good evening, and thank you for coming. Good night.